This tiny sealed device can cost $3,000, and today we are cutting it open under a microscope. Inside is not a speaker from another planet. It is a miniature microphone, a processor, a receiver, a battery contact, and a custom shell packed into something smaller than a grape. So what are people really paying for? Breakthrough engineering, medical care, locked down distribution, or the way the industry is built? Because millions need hearing help and wait years, not because the devices are invisible, but because the price is. For most people, the price shock does not start with the device. It starts in a quiet clinic room after a hearing test when the audiologist pulls up the results and says the words the patient already feared. You would benefit from hearing aids. Then comes the recommendation. Maybe 2 small devices, one for each ear, maybe a premium tier, because speech in restaurants is hard, phone calls are exhausting, and background noise is where cheaper models struggle. The patient is not comparing gadgets on a shelf. They are being told what it may cost to hear their spouse clearly again. The quote often lands in the thousands, $3,000, $5,000, sometimes more. And that number usually includes more than the plastic and electronics. It can include the hearing exam, the fitting appointment, custom programming, real ear measurements, follow-up adjustments, cleaning, repairs, warranty coverage, loss protection, clinic rent, staff time, and years of support. That matters because a prescription hearing aid is not supposed to work straight out of a box like a pair of headphones. It has to be tuned to a person's specific hearing loss, their ear shape, their comfort level, and the environments they live in. Bad fitting can turn an expensive device into something that sits in a drawer. The problem is that consumers usually see one bundled price, not a receipt that separates the medical care from the hardware. So the device becomes the symbol for the whole bill. And while people hesitate, hearing loss keeps charging interest. Conversations get skipped. Meetings become harder to follow. Family members get tired of repeating themselves. People withdraw, not because they do not care, but because listening has become work. So before we cut this thing open, the real question is simple. If the price includes all of that service, what is actually inside the device itself? Inside a modern hearing aid, the first thing you notice is how little empty space there is. The outer shell is not just packaging. It is shaped to sit behind the ear or inside the canal, survive sweat and skin oils, and guide sound through tiny openings without creating feedback. At the front are the microphones, usually more than one. They pick up sound from different directions, which lets the device estimate where speech is coming from and what might be background noise. Those microphone ports need protection because a speck of debris or moisture can change how the hearing aid hears the world. Then there is the receiver, which is the tiny speaker that sends processed sound into the ear. In many receiver in canal designs, it sits at the end of a thin wire close to the eardrum. Around it are wax guards, domes, acoustic seals, and sometimes custom molds, all meant to keep earwax out and keep amplified sound from leaking back to the microphones. The power source is either a disposable zinc air battery or a rechargeable lithium-ion cell. It has to run all day while feeding microphones, wireless radios, signal processing, and amplification. That is not trivial when the entire device may weigh less than a coin. On the circuit board is the processor, the real brain of the hearing aid. It is constantly analyzing incoming sound, reducing noise, suppressing feedback, shaping frequencies to match a prescription, and doing it with very low delay. If the latency is too high, voices feel disconnected from lips, and the user notices immediately. There is also an antenna for Bluetooth, or near-field wireless communication, squeezed into a body that was never designed to be radio-friendly. Every millimeter matters, because the casing, battery, hand, ear, and head can all affect the signal. So yes, on a table, the parts can look almost disappointingly small. Microphones, a speaker, a battery, a chip, a board, a shell, and seals. The engineering challenge is real. The hardware bill still does not explain the full retail price by itself. That is where the more interesting question begins. Why has this kind of technology been sold through such a narrow gate for so many decades? For most of the 20th century, a hearing aid was not sold like a phone, a laptop, or a pair of glasses. It was sold as part of a professional package. The manufacturer made the device, but the consumer usually did not buy it directly from the manufacturer. The hearing aid moved through a clinic, an audiology office, or a licensed dispenser. That office did not just hand over a box. It tested the patient's hearing, selected a model, programmed it, fit it, adjusted it, cleaned it, handled repairs, and scheduled follow-up visits. All of those services were commonly bundled into one final price. So when someone saw a hearing aid listed for $2,000, $3,000, or $6,000, that number was not just the plastic shell, microphones, chip, and receiver. It often included months or years of professional care, even if the receipt did not clearly separate the device from the service. There is a reason this model survived. Hearing loss is not one simple condition. A person may hear low tones well but miss high-frequency speech. Another may have poor word recognition, even when sound is made louder. Some patients need custom molds, feedback control, real ear measurements, tinnitus features, or repeated fine-tuning after trying the device in restaurants, cars, and family conversations. For those patients, expert support can matter as much as the electronics. A poorly fitted hearing aid can be uncomfortable, too loud, too sharp, or useless in noise. Good programming can be the difference between a drawer full of abandoned devices and something worn every day. The problem is that bundling also hides the price. A patient cannot easily tell how much went to hardware, how much went to fitting, and how much went to future appointments they may never use. It becomes difficult to compare one clinic with another, or one technology level with a cheaper model that might be good enough that opacity changes the shopping experience. The consumer is often sitting in front of the same professional who diagnoses the loss, recommends the device, sells it, and provides the aftercare. Even when everyone is acting honestly, the structure pushes trust and sales into the same conversation. And this system did not remain dominant only because customers preferred it. It was reinforced by regulation, controlled distribution, and a market where a small group of companies held enormous power over what reached the patient. Regulation gave this system legal weight. For decades, hearing aids were treated less like ordinary electronics and more like medical devices that required professional involvement. In many places, a buyer needed an evaluation, a licensed dispenser, or a clinic-based fitting before getting access to the product. That created a narrow doorway between the manufacturer and the person who would actually wear the device. Once inside that doorway, the market was not very crowded. A small group of global companies controlled most prescription hearing aid sales. Names like Sonova, Demant, WS Audiology, GN Store Nord, and Starkey dominated the industry through brands, patents, distribution networks, and long relationships with clinics. Competition existed, but it was mostly competition inside the same professional channel. The control did not end at the sale. Many devices depended on proprietary programming software that ordinary users could not download. The tools needed to adjust frequency gain, noise reduction, feedback control, and listening programs were often available only to clinics or authorized professionals. Even if a customer owned the hardware, they could not fully control the settings without going back through the system. Repair followed the same pattern. Modern hearing aids are tiny, sealed, moisture-resistant devices packed with custom chips, microphones, receivers, batteries, and antennas. That design helps performance, but it also makes independent repair difficult. If a receiver fails, a battery degrades, or a shell cracks, the practical answer is often not a local electronics shop. It is the clinic, the manufacturer, or replacement. This is where hearing aids start to look like a right-to-repair case study. A person can spend thousands of dollars on a device and still depend on locked software, restricted parts, and authorized service channels to keep using it. Ownership becomes conditional. For years, that structure kept prices high and slowed outside disruption. Then regulators changed one key rule, and for the first time, consumer tech companies had a legal path around the gatekeepers. In 2022, the Food and Drug Administration created a new category, over-the-counter hearing aids for adults who believe they have mild to moderate hearing loss. For the first time, a person could buy a real hearing aid without a prescription, without a mandatory clinic visit, and without going through the traditional dispenser model. That single rule change opened the door to a different kind of product. Instead of a bundled medical service sold through an office, companies could sell devices directly online, in pharmacies, and through big retailers. Some looked like conventional hearing aids. Others looked more like earbuds. The setup moved onto the phone with apps that test hearing, adjust sound profiles, change noise reduction, and let users fine-tune the device at home. The price difference was hard to ignore. While prescription pairs often reached several $1,000s. Many over-the-counter models arrived at a few hundred to around $1,000. That did not make them cheap in an absolute sense, but it changed the comparison. A buyer who had avoided hearing aids for years because of cost suddenly had a legal accessible starting point. The new category also brought in companies with consumer electronics experience. Sony, Bose, Jabra, and smaller startups began competing on battery life, design, Bluetooth features, and app experience. The hearing aid was no longer only a clinic-managed medical product. It was becoming part medical device, part wearable technology. But over-the-counter does not mean universal. These devices are intended for adults with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss. They are not meant for children. Sudden hearing loss, one-sided hearing loss, severe loss, pain, drainage, dizziness, or other red flags that need professional evaluation. And even for the right user, fit still matters. A poorly sealed or uncomfortable device can ruin the result no matter how good the chip is. So the disruption is real, but limited. Over-the-counter hearing aids can lower the entry price and return some control to the user. What they cannot do is replace every audiologist, diagnose every condition, or solve the trust problem created by decades of high prices. If cheaper options now work for many people, the harder question is whether the old price was always justified. So the teardown did not just expose cheap parts inside an expensive shell. It exposed a pricing system where device cost, care cost, and markup are often impossible to separate. Before buying, ask for itemized pricing, trial terms, repair rules, programming access, and whether over-the-counter fits your loss. Thanks for watching. Comment with your hearing aid experience and subscribe for more teardowns that follow the money.